All right, it's 1:30. Hello, welcome to our Candid Shop Talk for the week of July 15th, 2020. I'm Dave with Candid Wholesale Community, and today we are going to be talking about catching up with the CARES Act. The CARES Act is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act passed by the United States Congress in March of 2020. It's a lot of things. And the idea is that it rolled out to help businesses and individuals who are struggling with the unbelievable economic fallout of the coronavirus pandemic in the United States. It's been a couple months. I wanted to check in. We talked about this when it first came out and how to get the funds that are available to you and what to expect moving forward. And we're coming up on some pivotal weeks here as the first batch is running out or has run out. So it seemed like a good time to catch up and sort of review the state of play, the state of affairs, and what we can look forward to or dread in the future. So let's begin with the backstory. CARES Act was $2 trillion. This is the best breakdown I ever saw of what went where. It starts off with 2 billions. You've got a big chunk for individuals, big chunk for large corporations, big chunk for small businesses, which, as we later learned, included some large corporations due to a staggering lack of oversight and accountability. Then some state and local government funds, some public health funds, and a tiny sliver for the social safety net. So, what happened in March was that a lot of, as the coronavirus really, really hit and started getting taken seriously across the United States, there were a lot of shutdowns of various levels happening at state and local levels. So the big tools available to businesses have been the PPP loan and the EIDL loan. The PPP was the Payroll Protection Act, and the EIDL is the Emergency Economic Injury Disaster Loan. These are really the two that small businesses had access to. They couldn't be used for the same thing, but the idea was that it was a forgivable loan. A loan that you would apply for that if you met certain criteria, such as keeping people on payroll or rehiring to make up for people who were laid off or just had their shifts reduced, that loan would be forgiven. So it was an incentive to not just grab your money and run into the corner and wait things out, but rather to keep the financial lifeblood that you had available to you pumping through the pipes. Additionally, at the individual level, unemployment was boosted across the board with an extra $600 a week, meaning that if you're pre-unemployment, if you lost your job and your salary was $65,000 a year or below, you would be seeing greater payments through this program than you otherwise would. This is particularly topical because that extra 600 is about to run out at the end of this month, July, and people are growing increasingly concerned about what's going to happen next because that $600 a week is considerable. Additionally to that, there are state and local programs and various private programs that either popped up or had some new spotlights shown on them for ways that small businesses, I say small businesses, but generally just businesses and individuals could apply for extra funds to get through things. So flash forward to today, it is July 15th. Let's kind of take a look at all these things piece by piece and see where we're at. So as for reopening, it's which itself I think is a problematic word. It tends to imply a binary, yes or no that doesn't really exist. Here's a chart from today's New York Times that I think is pretty useful, showing how all 50 states are reopening and closing again. This color codes it into 4 sections: reopened, reopening, pausing, and reversing. And as you can see, a lot of the down here in these southern and western states that went into it have experienced new outbreaks and are starting to dial things back. States that tend to be touching those states for the most part are pausing. And then we've got a handful of states that have reopened and are in the process of reopening. What's interesting about that is this tells part of the story. When you scroll down here, you see a little bit more, which is that sector by sector, this varies a fair amount. Although for the most part, there are a few state level restrictions anywhere. I think gyms, hair salons, barbershops, and restaurants tend to be feeling, well, I guess salons are pretty good. Gyms and restaurants, anything where you're doing extended indoor close proximity to each other are are having the worst time of it. Retail stores, interestingly, are open in all 50 states. So theoretically, you know, considering we here at Candid Wholesale Community are focused on retail and its role in the landscape, that should seem like good news. It is, let's see, here's another view of the same thing. This is covidexitstrategy.org. I'll be posting the links at the end of this talk in the Facebook group, so you can check these out at your leisure. But this is just another way of looking at the same data, which is a little more grimmed and a little more, you know, focused on the medical and epidemic level stuff rather than the economic. But it's pretty bleak. I mean, we are in the much touted second wave. It can be argued whether the first wave really ever subsided fully, but it just given the way that this spreads and given the way that economic indicators kind of trail the epidemiology of it, it's going to get worse before it gets better, and it's probably going to stay pretty bad for a while. So that's the grim epidemic news. Retail is bouncing back than other sectors. Oh, let's see, I forgot one of my links here. Let me add it real quick. Actually, no, I take it back. This is not the source I wanted to look at. Retail is bouncing back quicker than other sectors. Restaurants, oh no, that was, sorry. Restaurants, leisure, and hospitality have really been the hardest hit, as you would imagine. I think, you know, they don't have the option of falling back into online or curbside delivery like a lot of retailers do. Let's see, there's some good charts in here. Good, in scare quotes. Where are you, buddy? There we go. So this dotted line here is the baseline for where things were at March 1st. Consumer department stores have managed to bounce back, you know, a fair amount, in some cases above, in some cases close, whereas restaurants and other hospitality things tend to be really, really favorable. So qualified, relatively good news for retailers. However, it's all still below the baseline. You know, and the goal is not with inflation and everything, the goal is not to stand still, the goal is to continue to grow. So the overall economic forecast is not terrific. A couple weeks ago, I think late June, the Congressional Budget Office released their projections for the next decade. And as you can see, it's going to be, as of current projections, and who knows how they're going to hold, it's looking like 2023 before we get back to where we should be right now. And you know, the economy is going to be what they're calling below potential until at least 2028. So it's just kind of gnarly. Anecdotally, okay, so let's see here. There are some pockets of good news, some areas of growth. Back to school spending is hitting a record, but of course this is, you know, a lot of these are one-time purchases of people frantically needing to buy big ticket technological items so that they can participate in remote learning and things like that. I mean, I know that just looking at my own household spending, we've certainly given rise to some indicators. I think we've purchased some more streaming services. I built a swing set in the backyard for my kids who now can't go anywhere. And I think that's important to bear in mind when you're trying to extrapolate from trends. I think a lot of the good news that you're seeing is one-off spending in categories that people don't generally spend in. So yeah, sorry, I wish there were better news, but that's what I'm seeing at that level. Getting specifically into the CARES Act. So it's, you know, it was designed to get us through June for the most part. It's now July. Where do we go from here? I found a good article here on CNBC sort of catching us up as of the state of things. There is a sequel act to the CARES Act, which is called the HEROES Act. You may remember it. It was passed by House Democrats in May. It's a $3 trillion stimulus bill. It's got a $1,200 stimulus check. It's got a lot of really good things. It is stalled out and no progress has been made on it. We will see what happens there. I'm not holding my breath. At the same time, I think it is, you know, the fact that it's a bill that's been passed by one House of Congress means it's the closest thing we have to what comes next. As for the two pieces of the original CARES Act, the PPP and the EIDL, there have been some updates on those. Generally pretty good, I think, in the grand scheme of things. First, with the PPP, it has reopened. So it stopped. It had a really, really rough rollout where the rules were getting revised hourly in the initial days. There was not a lot of transparency because it was structured as a forgivable loan that is given out by banks and credit unions and then reimbursed. The banks and credit unions themselves were acting differently and for the most part, I think wisely holding off. And they wanted to know what the criteria were before they started loaning out all their money. It was pretty chaotic, and it wound up settling at some point. I think it rolled out in early April, I want to say, and it wasn't until mid-April that I felt like I personally had a sense of what was going on with it, and I was following it pretty closely. It closed, and it is now reopened. So if you missed that first wave for any good number of reasons, you are eligible to apply for it now. The idea is that it gives you, you use their spreadsheet to figure out what your average monthly payroll is. You get a loan for 2.5 times that, and then you have what was initially 8 weeks is now 24 weeks to repay that. Or rather, you have 24 weeks during which the forgiveness period extends. And during that time, if you can prove when it comes time to forgiveness that you spent more than at least 75% of that on payroll and a couple of other very specific things that are covered, you can get that loan forgiven. So it turns into a grant and just free money. And the idea with that is that it needs to be a certain percentage on payroll so that you're not just grabbing it and doing stock buybacks or purchasing silver ingots or whatever you do when you want to hoard your gold like a dragon on a mountain and not pump it back into the economy where it's needed. So that's the good news about the PPP. These things are still developing daily to some extent, but there is new legislation that's in talks that would grant automatic forgiveness of loans under $150,000, which would be delightful because I know, whatever the statistic is in here, they make up 85% of PPP borrowers, but only 26% of the funds obligated. So I think, the amount of time spent by, if it reduces your caseload of things that you as a bank have to review by 85%, and you're probably going to forgive it all anyway, I think I'm very much in favor of this. We'll see what happens there. Another development that seems to have happened is full forgiveness for self-employed borrowers. So there was a lot of talk. If you are self-employed, if you're a single member LLC that passes through, situations where it's basically just one person and you don't have a regular payroll. The math on this was very tricky, and it still has been unclear what your forgiveness percentage will be. Like, do you figure out your average annual salary and divide by 12, or do you go through and tally up all your disbursements from your one bank account to the other, assuming you're doing it the right way? And if you're not doing it the right way, what do you do? It looks like, as of a month ago, per the interim final rule on the PPP, full forgiveness for self-employed freelancers and independent contractors who took the maximum loan amount based on 2.5 times their 2019 monthly income. So that is all still TBD. Every time I talk to our accountant about rules, he says, this is my best guess right now. Do not look at this as ironclad advice, which is frustrating because, of course, the banks say talk to your financial advisor, and it's all still quite swirling and chaotic. But that's the current state of affairs with the PPP. It's it is what it is. It's been in the news a lot with larger companies qualifying as small businesses and getting these loans, which has been very frustrating to see. There are websites where you can go and find your favorite large company that you want to get angry about. But that's that. It is what it is. It's open again. So if you missed it the first time, you can get back in there and have another go at it. The EIDL loan, you might remember this. This is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, also put out by the SBA. The big exciting selling point on this one was that they had, up to $10,000 you could get an advance on this that was forgivable and forgiven, and you didn't have to pay it back. So that was per employee. So if you had 5 employees and you applied for this thing, whatever your eventual loan amount was, you were at least theoretically going to get $5,000 right off the bat that you never had to pay back. So that was awesome on paper. I know one company I've talked to who actually managed to get that grant advance money. It, like the PPP, ran out of money very quick, or they closed the doors on that really quickly. They are now accepting new applications. As of June 15th, new applications can come in. It's similar to the PPP in that it can be used for certain things. You have to be careful if you have both of them, because you can't say, oh, I'm going to pay half my employees with the PPP and half my employees with the EIDL. It's worth looking into the very specifics. You know, if you're interested in any of this, it certainly doesn't hurt to apply for everything you possibly can, and then do the figuring out when you actually hear back from them. But the very important note: all available funds for the EIDL Advance program have been allocated. So what that means is you can apply for the loan, and it's the same loan, you know, reasonably decent terms. First payment is off for a year, so it's basically an interest-free loan for a year, which is great. But the EIDL Advance, the free money, has been fully allocated and is not currently available. So this went from being a small but welcome free money spigot to a generous loan term opportunity backed by the federal government. That if you're, again, in the market for this stuff, it's still worth your time to check it out. Excuse me. On the unemployment tip, we are approaching, at the end of the month, the extra $600 a week ends this month unless it's renewed. That just is what it is. If you're a worker, if you have workers that are laid off that you've had to let go, that you're thinking, well, at least they're getting this extra $600, that's about to go away, and it remains to be seen if that's going to be extended or renewed. That's something that is very, very much worth keeping up on the news with. But as of July 15th, 2020, it shows up in a lot of headlines. I'm hearing a lot about it, but the takeaway from all of them is that we just don't know. Additionally, it's worth noting, you know, whatever numbers you're seeing about the unemployment rate, the weekly unemployment claims, that sort of thing. The fact of the matter is a lot more people are just losing their jobs permanently. And it's, of course, varied across, you know, sector by sector. It's different, but it's just pretty, you were working for or your company goes out of business, it takes those jobs with them, and they're just not necessarily ready to come out. Oop, my internet connection is unstable. Apologies if I drop off suddenly. But yeah, you know, and there's some good news. You see these little bumps coming up, but it's still, they're nowhere near the initial hit. So it is what it is. So that's the grim news at the federal level. What about state and local programs? These are, you know, there's 50 states and however many municipalities, so I can't possibly speak to all of them, but the best place to look, I think, is still your state senator. To confirm this, today I went to Oregon State Senator Ron Wyden's official website, and there in 1,000 point font right up front is a click here. So I think, you know, your mileage may vary, I think, depending on the political tenor and engagedness of your state senators, but that's the best place to start when looking for state level resources. And it talks about, you know, workers, individuals, families, small businesses, you know, the PPP, the EIDL, and then there's some random stuff here, employee retention credits, the IRS, great, good to know. That should be your first stop when looking at state stuff. And locally too, you know, look around. It varies state by state, municipality by municipality, but most major metropolitan areas will have some sort of local business commission, probably several, probably any number of alliances based on affinity groups, whether it's, you know, health food sellers or minority-owned businesses. Like look around in your communities and see who there is and who's got money. And to that end, there are a number of small, you know, companies and independent small, you know, small to medium-sized business resources that are available. It depends, you know, by and large, the majority of these third-party grants that you're going to get are in the $5,000 to $15,000 range, which if you're a smaller company, if you're a sole proprietorship, like that could keep you going for another month. If you're a larger company, that, you know, it might not even be worth your time to track them down because it will just go fizz when it hits the skillet. But that said, I found, it's worth just kind of looking around everywhere. Like I logged into Gusto to do payroll the other day, and there was an alert about a COVID R&D credit that my company might be eligible for. We weren't, but that was a thing that is worth looking at. Facebook had their own thing. This page that I found at nav.com, which I'll post in the group, is a very large list of potential grants that you can get. They're just all over. And again, I think just do the math. And if, knowing that they tend to be between $5,000 and $15,000, if that is going to move the needle for you or your company, check it out. Otherwise, probably not. So that all being said, that's kind of the state of the union. I think it's hard to not want to come up with some sort of closing conclusion. I think I found this quote, in a letter to the editor of a political blog that I read. So take that as you will, but I think it's worth sharing because it just puts a perspective on things. This person said, "It's been 100 years since a pandemic here and over 150 years since a major conflict on the American continent. There's just no contextualizing this risk of pandemic for a broad American populace who are barely grounded in history, much less humility about global affairs." Maybe that says more about Europe than the US and the real difference in the two on COVID-19. I think that what that crystallizes and clarifies for me is that this is just uncharted territory. And looking outside our borders, I think looking at reopening trends in Europe and Asia, without wanting to be too doom and gloom about it, they just have completely fundamentally different approaches, and we're going to be in this for a while. So even if you don't think of yourself as the type of company that needs additional support right now, I think we're digging in for the long haul. I still do. I did months ago, and here we still are, with it looking potentially even grimmer than it did. Don't be shy about going after this money. Don't be shy about leaning on any resources that you have and doing whatever it takes to survive this, because at the end of the day, you're not going to be helping your customers. You're not going to be helping your workers if you go out of business. So yeah, sorry to not have better news, but that's the state of the world. That's the state of American small business relief circa July 15th, 2020. So as always, we try to do these every Wednesday, these Candid Shop Talks here in the Candid Wholesale Community Facebook groups. I'm going to be posting a post with all the websites that I linked in here. We blazed through them, but they were all pretty good reads if you want to go deeper on any of these subjects. And as always, don't be shy. If you have any questions, we're here for you. So thanks for watching. Really appreciate your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.